How did each state trend on a presidential level between 1964 and 2024? That is what we're going to find out in this video. It's going to span 60 years from the landslide of Lyndon Johnson to the re-election of Donald Trump. Tons of modern political history between these two elections. Now, last week we just took a look at the shifts or the swings in each state. This is going to compare those swings to the national swing, and that's going to give us the trends. We'll break it down in just a moment. And of course, there's a map at the end, and there'll be a chapter to that map down below in the description. But first, as always, we've got to put up the background information. So a quick refresher on 64. That was a massive blowout for Johnson. He got 468 electoral votes. He carried 44 states plus D.C. And his popular vote share was way up there at 61.1. He took down Barry Goldwater, who got just 52 electoral votes out of 6 states, and that was worth 38.5%. Now, the 24 election we cover in pretty much every video, so I'm not going to go through it yet again, but it's there if you want to take a look at it. But it's safe to say that the 64 election with Johnson, who assumed the presidency after John F. Kennedy got assassinated, that election and everything going on in the country at that time led him to a complete domination of the map. Trump's win in 24 was a win, but nowhere near that kind of a landslide. So let's get onto the spreadsheet. On the left side, we've got the states. Then it's the 64 vote for Johnson, then for Goldwater. Then we've got the 24 vote for Harris, then Trump. Then it's the margin in 64 shaded accordingly. Then it's the same thing for 24. Then we've got the column from last week. These are the swings or the shifts in each state. That's just the difference between the two previous columns. Finally, the column all the way on the left is the trends. This will tell us how each state moved compared to the national popular vote. And there's also shading in these two columns. We've got the darkest colors are 10 or more points. The lightest are under 5%. So to get started, the first thing we've got to do is real quick get our national baseline. So nationally in 64, again, we've got Johnson at 61.1, Goldwater 38.5. In 24, Harris got 48.3, Trump got 49.8. The margin for Johnson in 64 was 22.6. The margin for Trump in 24 was 1.5. The math there is pretty easy. That's 22.6% away from Johnson, another 1.5% toward Trump. You combine those numbers, that comes out to a total national popular vote swing of 24.1 toward Trump and the Republicans. So anything higher than that number is going to be a red trend. Anything less than that is a blue trend. Let's see what we've got in the first state. That's Alabama. Now, this is the only state that's a little bit different because that percentage there is not for Lyndon Johnson. Technically, the electors were unpledged there, but because there's nothing else, I think it's fair to put it in italics and to say that those numbers would go toward Johnson had it worked out a little different. On the other side, Barry Goldwater won the state with 69.5. In 24, we've got Harris going up to 34.1. Trump went down to 64.6. The margin for Johnson at 64 was 38.9. The margin for Trump in 24 was 30.5. That's a total landslide for Trump, but it is less than what Johnson got in 64. So that state swung 8.4% bluer toward Harris. And that 8.4% is in the opposite direction of how the country moved. That was 24.1 in the other direction. So once you add those numbers together, that comes out to a pretty big 32.5% trend toward the Dems. If you look at the next state in Alaska, that state had a giant swing toward Trump by 44.9. That is more than the 24.1% national swing. The difference between those results in a red trend of 20.8%. So hopefully it all makes sense. Now let's quickly rapid fire the rest of these states. Arizona, Barry Goldwater's home state, he barely won it and it trended toward the Dems by 19.5. Arkansas, very similar but in the opposite direction by 19.2. Now we've got blue trends. It's California at 26, Colorado 12, Connecticut 2.9, Delaware 16.6, Florida 8.7, and Georgia 30.1. Then in Hawaii, it's a blue state, but it moved enough toward the right that it had a red trend of 10.4. Idaho just above that at 14.2. Illinois just above that, but in the opposite direction by 16. Indiana got redder by 7.2. Same direction in Iowa at 13.1. Kansas, a small 1.1. And Kentucky's back up there at 34.7. In Louisiana, they trended bluer by a moderate 15.7. Maine had a more mild red trend at 6.7. Maryland went toward the left at 21.6. Massachusetts actually went toward the right by a little bit by 3.5. Michigan Michigan double digits toward the GOP at 10.9. Minnesota had the smallest trend out of all the states. That's just a 0.5% toward the Dems. Mississippi had the biggest trend out of all the states. It's a super red state, but it went super hard toward the Dems, trending that way by a massive 75.4. Missouri went toward the Republicans by 22.4, as did Montana at 14.2, and Nebraska by a small 1.7. Nevada got a little bluer at 3.8. New Hampshire got a tiny bit redder at 0.8%. New Jersey about double that by 1.7. New Mexico bluer by 11.1. New York barely tilted toward the GOP by 0.7%. North Carolina went toward the Dems by 8.7. Then it was redder in North Dakota at 28.5. Ohio 12.7, and Oklahoma 21.7. Oregon trended 10.7% bluer. Pennsylvania trended redder by 7.8. Rhode Island significantly more than that by an even 24. In South Carolina, which had no movement between these two elections, that means it trended toward the Dems exactly the percentage that the entire country moved. That's 24.1. Then more red trends in South Dakota at 16.3, Tennessee 16.6, Texas, Johnson's home state 16.4, and Utah clocks it at 6.9. Then it's bluer in Vermont at 23. Virginia, 0.5% less than that. Then Washington is at 17.7. West Virginia had the biggest trend toward the Republicans, coming in at a big 53.6. Wisconsin, a slight red trend at 1.2. And Wyoming, a major red trend at 34.9. Then it's Washington, D.C. They trended even harder than Wyoming, but toward the Dems at 36.9. So that's it. Those are all of the states and all of the trends. Now, obviously, we can't end it there. We've got to take all this data and put it on a map. If we do that, here's what we've got. First off, it's similar shading. The darkest colors are 10% or more. The very lightest colors this time are under 1%. Those would be the tilt margins. So 4 levels of shading. And what are the big takeaways? Well, first of all, if you look at the numbers at the top, using the current electoral vote map, it's basically 50-50. Republicans come out with the smallest possible advantage. They're at 270, the Dems are at 268. And on this map, the Dems actually dominate in the South. There are different dynamics at play in some of those states. So even though most of those are super red today, they just couldn't possibly keep up with the massive 24-point swing toward Trump. So that's why those are blue. Then you've got the blue West Coast, the mid-Atlantic states, and Vermont, Illinois, and Colorado and the Southwest as the other dark blue states. That's where the Dems have their strength, but the Republicans, they have some blue states of their own. They've got Hawaii and Rhode Island. Those are some dark red states, plus other New England states and New York, New Jersey, and the 3 Rust Belt states, especially Michigan. That one also dark red. So it's certainly a mixed bag here. Most states did move toward Trump, many of them heavily. But again, even if they moved 10% in his direction, that's still way, way less than 24% nationally. So sometimes the trends can be a little bit confusing, but all the data is there from the darkest states to the lightest. And speaking of lightest, those 3 states are Minnesota, New York, and New Hampshire. They swung almost perfectly in line with the rest of the country. That's why they have a tilt rating. So there's some good stuff in here, and of course, there's a lot of political changes happening in the country, especially back in '64, but of course, through the following 60 years up to the present day. The strengths and the weaknesses of these candidates and the specific issues determining why states moved the way that they did. That's a separate video on why they moved. But as far as what moved, you're looking at the trends right here between 64 and 24. So let me know in the comments, what do you think about any of the trends in any of these states? Which 2 or 3 states surprise you the most? Maybe it's Rhode Island in the Northeast. Maybe it's some of those southern states getting a lot bluer. Or maybe it's Michigan in the middle of the Rust Belt getting way redder. Let me know what you think about the candidates, the data, or any of the reasons behind these trends down below on your way out. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.